Between 1946 and 1948, a group of scientists arrived in Guatemala to conduct a study that would remain hidden from the world for over 60 years. They were looking for ways to protect soldiers, but the methods they used were beyond anything the public could imagine. Hundreds of innocent people were targeted in a series of events that bypassed every rule of medical ethics. It was a secret funded by power and guarded by silence. Today, we uncover the documents that finally brought the truth into the light. This is a story of betrayal in the name of science. Let's go deep into the well. In the late 1940s, a team of medical researchers from the United States traveled to Guatemala City. They came with massive funding and the full support of local authorities to start what appeared to be a major health project. The official goal was to study how certain infections spread and how new medicines like penicillin could stop them. At first, it looked like a standard medical mission meant to help a developing population. However, the true nature of the work was kept strictly confidential and away from any public records or oversight. The researchers chose Guatemala because it offered a population that was easy to monitor and control without the strict rules found at home. They viewed the local people as a resource for data rather than individuals with basic human rights. This mindset set the stage for a series of actions that would eventually haunt the medical community for decades. The arrival of these scientists marked the beginning of a dark era for hundreds of unsuspecting citizens who believed they were in safe hands. They built laboratories and clinics that seemed modern and helpful, but the reality behind the closed doors was very different. The local government welcomed them, thinking this partnership would bring prestige and medical advancement to the country. Instead, it brought a secret that would take generations to uncover. The scientists did not pick their subjects at random from the general public. They focused on specific groups that were isolated and had very little power to say no or defend themselves. This included soldiers in local barracks, prisoners in state jails, and patients in psychiatric hospitals. Even children in orphanages were included in the scope of the project as the researchers looked for younger subjects. These people were chosen because they lived in controlled environments where their movements and diets could be dictated by the staff. Most of the subjects were never told what was happening to them or what the scientists were looking for in their blood. They were treated as numbers in a ledger rather than human beings deserving of respect and clear communication. The researchers believed that using these vulnerable groups would provide the most accurate results for their military data. It was a cold calculation that ignored every principle of consent and human dignity. The victims had no lawyers, no advocates, and no way to report the strange procedures they were forced to undergo. They were perfect subjects for a study that needed to stay in the shadows to survive. The power dynamic was completely one-sided, leaving the participants at the total mercy of the visitors in white coats. The most shocking part of the story is how the researchers decided to gather their scientific data. Instead of waiting for people to get sick naturally, the scientists took active steps to spread infections among the groups. They used various methods to introduce bacteria into the bodies of the subjects without their knowledge or understanding. In some cases, they paid people to spread the infection to others as part of a controlled social chain. In other instances, they applied the bacteria directly to the skin or through medical procedures under false pretenses. The subjects were often told they were receiving routine checkups, cleanings, or life-saving vaccinations. The level of deception was total, and the victims had no reason to doubt the people who claimed to be experts. These methods were designed to ensure that the researchers had a steady and predictable supply of sick individuals to study. It was a deliberate act of harm carried out by people who had sworn an oath to protect human health. The researchers kept detailed logs of how each person reacted to the initial contact with the bacteria. They watched closely as the first symptoms appeared, documenting the pain and discomfort with scientific coldness. This was a carefully planned operation that treated human bodies like test tubes. The main reason for these experiments was to test the effectiveness of penicillin, which was the miracle drug of that era. The researchers wanted to see if the drug could prevent an infection from taking hold or cure it once it was fully active. They gave different doses to the subjects and recorded the results with incredible detail in their private journals. While some people were treated and cured, Many others were left without proper care to see how the illness would progress over time. The scientists were more interested in the long-term effects of the bacteria than the immediate health or comfort of the people. This led to many victims suffering from chronic pain and permanent physical damage that lasted for the rest of their lives. The drug was treated as a valuable military asset, but for the people in the study, it was part of a terrifying and confusing mystery. The data collected was sent back to offices thousands of miles away to be analyzed by officials who never saw the faces of the victims. The success of the medicine was built on the suffering of people who never received a thank you or a cent of compensation. The results were used to create new protocols for soldiers, while the people in Guatemala were left to deal with the scars. At the center of this secret project was a man named Dr. John Cutler. He was a lead researcher who believed that the importance of the science outweighed the rights of any individual subject. Cutler was known for his extreme dedication to his work and his willingness to push legal boundaries to get the results he wanted. He managed the daily operations in Guatemala and kept detailed notes on every single man, woman, and child involved. His private letters to his superiors show a man who was fully aware of the ethical problems but chose to ignore them for the sake of his career. He even mentioned in his writing that some of the work could be seen as a scandal if it ever became public knowledge. Despite these internal concerns, he continued to expand the project and find new ways to conduct his dangerous tests. Cutler represents the extreme end of scientific ambition where empathy and morality are completely removed from the process. His name would eventually become synonymous with this dark chapter of history when the files were opened. He moved on to other high-level positions in the medical world, carrying the secret of Guatemala with him for the rest of his life. For over 60 years, the details of what happened in the clinics of Guatemala remained locked away in private files and boxes. The researchers eventually returned home to their families and their respected careers in the United States. The local authorities moved on to other political issues and the memory of the mission began to fade from the public mind. The victims were left to deal with the long-term health consequences without any explanation or medical support. Many died without ever knowing why they had become sick or who was truly responsible for their pain. There was no public debate, no legal trial, and no apology for the actions taken between 1946 and 1948. The medical journals of the time did not publish the full details of how the data for the penicillin studies was gathered. It was a successful and professional cover-up that lasted through several decades and multiple changes in government. The silence was maintained by a professional culture that did not question the methods used by its senior leaders. It was a hidden tragedy that seemed destined to stay buried forever under the weight of time. The truth finally came out in 2010 when a professor named Susan Reverby found the documents while researching a completely different topic. She discovered John Cutler's private papers and was deeply horrified by the details she read in his notes. The records included the real names of the victims, the exact dates of the procedures, and the specific methods used to infect them. This discovery made headlines around the world and forced a massive and immediate reaction from the public. It was a rare moment where a long-hidden secret was suddenly exposed to the light of modern ethics and digital media. The documents proved that the experiments were not just a rumor or an urban legend, but a well-documented series of crimes. This discovery changed the way historians and doctors look at the history of medical research in the middle of the 20th century. It served as a powerful reminder that history always has a way of finding its way back to the present, no matter how hard people try to hide it. The professor's work turned a forgotten box of papers into a global conversation about justice and the limits of science. Following the discovery of the documents, the highest levels of the government were forced to address the issue directly. An official apology was issued to the people of Guatemala for the actions of the researchers so many years ago. A special commission was formed to investigate the full extent of the harm and to find any survivors who might still be alive. The final report from the commission described the experiments as a dark day in medical history and a failure of leadership. It acknowledged that the rights of the subjects had been completely ignored in the pursuit of scientific data for the military. While the apology was a significant diplomatic step, many families felt that it was too little and too late for the people who had already passed away. The survivors and their descendants sought justice and financial compensation for the decades of suffering they had endured in silence. The legal battles that followed were long and complex, highlighting the difficulty of fixing a wrong that happened so many years in the past. It was a moment of accountability that the victims had waited a lifetime to see. The Guatemala experiments now serve as a primary example of why modern medical research has such strict and unbreakable rules today. The case is taught in universities all over the world to show the vital importance of informed consent and the protection of vulnerable groups. It led to a total change in how human studies are conducted and monitored by independent ethical boards. We have learned that science cannot exist in a cold vacuum away from human rights and basic morality. The victims of Guatemala are remembered today not for the data they provided, but for the tragedy they were forced to endure. Their story is a permanent warning that power must always be balanced by total accountability and transparency. We honor the victims by telling their story and making sure the world never forgets what happened in the secret lab. Thank you for walking through this dark history with me. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.